Hi everybody. So in this video, we're going to talk about another way to make a graph. So rather than using a starting point and a slope like we did in the previous video, we're just going to be looking at making a graph by looking at special features of that graph. So what you're going to want to do here is you're going to want to think of the directions here as like a shopping list. These are the things you're looking for on your graph. You just have to make a graph that meets those requirements. On this first problem, if I read through the instructions, there are two important pieces of information. The first thing that it says here is that f of -1 is equal to -5. And the second thing that it says here is that the graph is always increasing. So let's start with what f of -1 is equal to -5 means. When you see this is telling you a point on a graph. So I'm going to graph the point where x is -1 and y is -5. On this graph, x is -1 right here and y is -5 right here. So if you imagine where those 2 points would kind of meet, they would meet right here. So when I make my final graph, it needs to go through that pink dot. Now, the second thing it says here is that the graph is always increasing. Now, increasing is another word for uphill. So I need to make a graph that is going uphill as I move from left to right. That means that the graph needs to look like this, because as you go from left to right, if you imagine drawing a car on this graph, you would be going uphill. So I'm going to draw a graph that goes uphill, that goes through that pink dot, which means it's going to look just like this, and I'm done. The next set of instructions says that the range of this graph is -2 to 5. Now in math, the word range is telling you the lowest and the highest values on the graph. So think about that like edges. It's the floor and the ceiling. So the -2 would be like the floor of this graph, which means on the graph, in order to remind myself that that's the lowest I can go, I'm going to put a little highlighted line at the -2. The 5 is telling me the highest that I can go is the number 5. So I'm going to put a little highlighted line on the number 5. Now, my only thing I need to do is draw a graph that stays between those lines and touches the top and touches the bottom. So in order to make sure that happens, I'm going to put a dot on the bottom and a dot on the top. Now you'll notice that those dots are not right on top of each other because I want to make sure that this is a function, which means it needs to pass the vertical line test. So it can't go straight up and down. It needs to go on a diagonal. And I'm just going to connect those dots. And now I've drawn a graph whose range is -2 to 5. The last problem here is a little bit more complicated because there are 3 criteria that we need to incorporate. The first is that the function has a minimum value of -2. Now, in math, the word minimum means the lowest that it can go. So the lowest that this graph is allowed to go is the -2. In order to remind my brain of that, I'm just going to draw a line at the -2 so that I know don't cross the line. Then the next statement here says that the maximum value is 6. Now in math, the word maximum just means the highest it can go. So the floor might be -2, but the ceiling, the highest that this graph can go, is going to be on the +6. The last criteria here that I need to account for is that it has an X-intercept of 2. Now on a graph, the X-intercept is where the graph crosses the X-axis. So it's where the graph touches this axis right here. So I'm going to put a dot on my graph on the +2 on the X-axis because I need to remember to touch that point. Now my job is to draw a graph that touches the bottom, the floor, touches the top, the ceiling, and goes through that pink dot. So in order to do that, I'm going to put a point on the top, on the ceiling, a point on the bottom, on the floor, and just make sure that I connect the dots. And I'm good. All right, that is it for today's review video. Thank you so much for watching, and good luck on your